The galaxy was a big place, full of many different species who had learned to live together in peace. They called themselves the Galactic Coalition. And for thousands of years, they had built a civilization based on trade, diplomacy, and careful rules. Most species in the coalition were what they call garden worlders. They came from peaceful planets with gentle weather, soft gravity, and plenty of food. They had evolved to be smart and social, not strong or dangerous. Then the humans arrived. Ambassador Yevoneri had been one of the first coalition diplomats to meet them. She was a Valkyrie, a species with soft blue skin and long tendrils instead of hair. Her people were gentle and kind, known across the galaxy as healers and teachers. When she first read the report on Earth, she had felt cold fear run through her body. Earth was what the coalition called a death world. The gravity was crushing compared to most planets. The atmosphere was filled with oxygen, a gas so reactive it could start fires and rust metal. The temperature swung from burning hot to freezing cold depending on where you stood. The planet was covered in predators that killed for food. And the humans had somehow climbed to the top of that food chain. They were persistent hunters, the report said. They would chase their prey for hours, sometimes days, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. They could survive wounds that would kill most species. They formed pack bonds with wolves, one of their planet's most dangerous predators, and turned them into loyal companions. They smiled when they were angry, showing their teeth like the predators they were. Yevoneri had warned her superiors. She had told them that inviting humans into the coalition was a mistake, but they had not listened. Humans were new to space travel. Their fleet was small. Their numbers were few. What harm could they possibly do? So the humans joined the coalition, and for 20 years, nothing bad happened. They traded fairly. They followed the rules. They kept to themselves mostly, building colonies and stations in their own corner of space. Some species hired them as guards or soldiers because humans were very good at fighting. But most of the galaxy forgot about them. Yevoneri never forgot. She watched the humans carefully, and she saw things that others missed. She saw how they looked at children, any children, with soft and protective eyes. She saw how they reacted when they heard about injustice or cruelty. There was something burning inside them, something old and dangerous. It was only sleeping. On the other side of coalition space, there was the Sketh hegemony. The Skeths were not members of the coalition. They were conquerors, a reptilian species with scales like armor and claws that could tear through metal. They believed that the strong had the right to rule the weak, and they had built their empire on slavery and fear. The coalition had fought wars against them before, but now there was an uneasy peace. The Sketh stayed on their side of the border, and the coalition stayed on theirs. But the Sketh were always hungry for more slaves. The Valkyrie refugee convoy was never supposed to be in danger. 3 transport ships, carrying 40,000 civilians, including many children, were traveling through neutral space. They were fleeing from a Valkyrie colony that had suffered a natural disaster. The coalition had promised them safe passage to a new home. The convoy's captain was an old Valkyrie named Merchant Father Sorel. He had made this journey many times before. He knew the route was safe. The Sketh border was far away, and coalition patrol ships were nearby. There was nothing to worry about. Then the Sketh hunting fleet appeared. 12 warships. Dropped out of hyperspace around the convoy like wolves surrounding sheep. They were not supposed to be there. They had crossed into neutral space, breaking every treaty and law. But the Sketh did not care about treaties when there was prey to be taken. Hi, Commander Skethrel watched from his flagship as his ships surrounded the transports. He was old for a Sketh. His scales faded to a dull gray, but his eyes were still sharp and cruel. 40,000 Valkyrie would make excellent slaves. The soft-skinned healers were valued in the labor camps because they could work gently and carefully. Their children would grow up knowing nothing but service to the hegemony. The jamming field activated, cutting off all communications. The convoy could not call for help. The coalition patrol ships were too far away to see what was happening. High Commander Skethrel gave the order to disable the transports and prepare boarding parties. On the lead transport ship, Merchant Father Sorel watched his sensors with growing horror. His ships had no weapons. They could not run. They could not fight. All he could do was watch as the Sketh warships moved closer. Their weapons charging, in the passenger sections, families huddled together. Mothers held their children close. Fathers stood in front of their loved ones, knowing they could do nothing to protect them. The Valkyrie were not fighters. They had no soldiers, no weapons, no way to resist. They were going to be taken, and there was nothing anyone could do. But Sorel was not ready to give up. He called his navigator, a young female named Tashera, and told her to try something desperate. The jamming field was strong, but it was not perfect. If she could find a gap, even for a moment, she might be able to send a signal. Tashara worked frantically, her tendrils flying over the controls. The Sketh jamming technology was good, but she was better. She found a tiny hole in the field, a gap that would last only a few seconds. It was not enough time to send a detailed message. It was not enough time to explain what was happening. All she could do was send a basic emergency signal, an SOS. With their location, she pressed the button and prayed that someone would hear. The signal was weak. It traveled through the gap in the jamming field and out into empty space. It did not reach any coalition military stations. They were all too far away. By the time they received it and sent ships, the convoy would be gone. But the signal did reach one ship. The Wandering Star was a small human trading vessel, old and worn but well-maintained. Its captain was a woman named Alina Vasquez. She was 62 years old, with gray hair and dark eyes that had seen too much. Before she became a trader, she had been a captain in the Terran Navy. She had fought in the Integration Wars, the conflicts that had united Earth under one government. She had seen battle and death, the worst things that humans could do to each other. She had also seen the best. Captain Vasquez was drinking coffee in her cabin when the signal came through. At first, she thought it was a mistake. An SOS in this region of space? There was nothing here but empty void and distant stars. But when she listened to the signal, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Screaming, children screaming, and a mother's voice begging for someone, anyone, to help. Alina Vasquez set down her coffee cup. Her hands were steady. Her heart was calm. But something old and dangerous woke up inside her, something that had been sleeping for 20 years. She walked to her communication console and opened a channel that had not been used since the wars. It was called Deathworlder Emergency Band 7, and every human ship was required to monitor it. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "This is Captain Alina Vasquez, Terran Merchant Marine. Broadcasting on Deathworlder Emergency Band 7, we have a civilian convoy under attack. 40,000 souls. 12 Sketh warships. Transmitting coordinates now." She paused. When she spoke again, her voice was cold and hard as iron. "They're killing kids out here. Get me, everyone." Then she sat back and waited. She knew what was coming. She knew what humans did when someone hurt children. The Sketh had made a terrible mistake. They just did not know it yet. The message spread across human space, like fire through dry grass. It moved at the speed of light through relay stations and communication networks. It bounced from ship to ship, station to station, planet to planet. Within minutes, every human within 100 light years had heard Captain Vasquez's words. "They're killing kids out here. Get me, everyone." On Mars, in the great underground city of New Olympus. Admiral James Okonkwo was sitting in his office reviewing boring supply reports. He was a tall man with dark skin and gray hair, 65 years old, but still strong. He had commanded the Terran Third Fleet for 15 years, and he was considered one of the best military minds humanity had ever produced. When the emergency alert sounded, he looked up from his work with a frown. The sound was familiar, but he had not heard it in many years. It was the Deathworlder Emergency Band, a channel reserved for the worst situations. When human lives were in danger and every second mattered, he read the transcript of Captain Vasquez's message. Then he read it again. His hands began to shake, but not with fear. Something was waking up inside him, something he had kept buried since the last war. Admiral Okonkwo stood up and walked to his communication console. He opened a channel to every ship in his fleet. This is Admiral Okonkwo. All vessels, prepare for immediate deployment. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. We have civilians under attack, including children. Full combat readiness. We leave in 10 minutes. Closed the channel and began putting on his uniform jacket. His aide, a young lieutenant named Torres, ran into the office with wide eyes. Sir, we don't have authorization from Coalition Command. They'll say we're overreacting. They'll say I don't care what they say, Admiral Okonkwo replied quietly. Children are dying. That's all I need to know. Across human space, the same scene repeated itself thousands of times. On Titan Station, orbiting the great moon of Saturn, the 14th Rapid Response Squadron had been running combat drills. Commander Sarah Chen was a small woman with short black hair and sharp eyes. She was only 34 years old, but she had already earned a reputation as one of the most aggressive fighter pilots in the fleet. When the emergency message played over the squadron's speakers, Commander Chen watched her pilots' faces change. The boredom disappeared. The tiredness vanished. Something cold and dangerous took its place. You heard the message, she said calmly. Get to your ships. We launch in 5 minutes. Ma'am, one of her pilots said. The Coalition hasn't authorized. I don't remember asking the Coalition for permission, Commander Chen replied. Those are kids out there. Our people are going. Are you coming or not? The pilot nodded. Within 90 seconds, every ship in the squadron was powered up and ready to fly. On Earth, in a small apartment in the city of New Seoul, an old woman named Grandmother Min was drinking tea and listening to her grandson's military scanner. She was 73 years old, with white hair and a face covered in wrinkles. But her eyes were still sharp, and her hands were still steady. When she heard Captain Vasquez's message, she set down her teacup very carefully. Then she picked up her phone and made 2 calls. The first call was to her old squadron mates, the retired pilots from the Unification Wars. Did you hear? She asked. Yes, I'm going. Meet me at the old hangar. The second call was to her grandson, a young mechanic who worked at a private spaceport. Get my ship out of storage, she said. The old bomber? Yes. I know it's been 20 years. Just do it. I'm coming. Her grandson tried to argue, but Grandmother Min was not listening. She was already putting on her old flight suit, the one she had kept in her closet all these years. It still fit. All across human space, people were answering the call. Active military, retired veterans, even civilians with personal ships. They did not wait for orders. They did not ask for permission. They simply heard that children were in danger and they went. The Coalition had never understood this about humans. They thought humans were dangerous because they were strong and aggressive. But that was not the real reason. Humans were dangerous because they cared. They formed bonds with people they had never met. They felt rage when strangers were hurt. They would cross the galaxy to protect someone else's children. The Valkyrie refugees were not human. But tonight, that did not matter. Someone had called for help. Someone's children were in danger. And for humans, that was enough. At 0342 Terran Standard Time, Admiral Okonkwo broadcast the official mobilization order. By 0347, 412 ships had reported ready for combat. By 0350, that number had grown to 600. By 0400, over 800 ships were converging on the same point in space. It was the largest human fleet deployment since first contact, assembled in less than 20 minutes, on the bridge of the flagship TFS Inheritance. Admiral Okonkwo studied the tactical display. Ships were still arriving, jumping in from colonies and stations across human space. Destroyers, frigates, cruisers, carriers. 3 massive dreadnoughts that the Coalition did not know existed. Fighter squadrons, bomber wings, assault transports. Every type of warship the Terran Federation possessed. His communications officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Park, looked up from her console with wide eyes. We're receiving reports from civilian vessels. They want to join the fleet. Civilian vessels. Admiral Okonkwo raised an eyebrow. Yes, sir. Trading ships, mining vessels, even passenger liners. They're arming themselves with whatever they have and requesting permission to accompany the fleet. Admiral Okonkwo was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. Tell them they're welcome. Assign them to the rear guard. They can help with evacuation and medical support. Yes, sir. Lieutenant Park hesitated. Sir. There's also a message from a woman called Grandmother Min. She says she's bringing her old bomber and she expects to be given a target.
Admiral Okonkwo smiled.
He knew who Grandmother Min was. Everyone in the military knew her story. She had been one of the most decorated pilots of the Unification Wars, famous for never missing a bombing run. Tell Grandmother Min she'll have her target, he said. Put her in the assault wing. The fleet was almost ready. 800 warships, plus civilian support vessels, all moving toward a single point in space. In front of them, the empty void where a refugee convoy was fighting for its life. Behind them, the stars they had sworn to protect. Admiral Okonkwo checked the time. 47 minutes until they reached the convoy. 47 minutes until they could help. He hoped it would be enough. On the wandering star, Captain Alina Vasquez was watching her sensors when the first ships began arriving. They jumped out of hyperspace in flashes of light, one after another. Filling the void with warships, she had known they would come. She had known what her message would do. But seeing it happen, watching hundreds of ships appear from nothing, still made her breath catch in her throat. Her communication console lit up with a priority message. She opened it and saw the face of Admiral Okonkwo. Captain Vasquez, he said, thank you for the alert. We're taking over from here. I'm not leaving, Admiral, Alina replied. I'm staying until those people are safe. Admiral Okonkwo smiled. It was a warm smile, but there was something dangerous underneath it. I wouldn't expect anything less, he said. Stay behind the fleet and be ready to help with evacuation. We'll clear you a path, Lena nodded. She watched as more ships continued to arrive, and she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Pride. This was what humans did. This was who they were. Not conquerors, not monsters, but protectors. People who would cross the galaxy to save strangers. People who would fight and die for children they had never met. The Sketh had made a terrible mistake. They had touched someone under human protection. And now they were going to learn what that meant. High Commander Skethrel was enjoying himself. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his gunners systematically disable the refugee ships. They were taking their time, as he had ordered. There was no rush. The Coalition patrol ships were hours away and no one else was coming. The Valkyrie were trapped, helpless, and completely at his mercy. The screaming on the open channels was particularly satisfying. Skethrel had always enjoyed the sounds of fear. It reminded him why the Sketh were the dominant species, why they deserved to rule over the weaker races. The strong took what they wanted. That was the natural order of things. His boarding parties were almost ready. Soon they would cut through the transport holes and drag the Valkyrie out one by one. The adults would go to the labor camps. The children would be raised as servants, trained from birth to obey their Sketh masters. It was a good day's work, High Commander, his sensor officer said suddenly. I'm detecting new contacts. Skethrel waved his clawed hand dismissively. Coalition response. They're hours away. Ignore them. Sir, these contacts are not coming from Coalition space. They're appearing directly around us. Multiple jump signatures. That made Skethrel look up. Ships jumping directly into the combat zone? That was unusual. No Coalition species had that kind of response time. He walked to the sensor station and looked at the display. His blood turned cold. Ships were appearing everywhere. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. They dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, surrounding the Sketh fleet in a sphere of metal and weapons. Destroyers on the outer edge, cruisers in the middle, and at the center. 3 massive dreadnoughts, larger than anything Skethrel had ever seen. Configuration matches Terran military signatures, his sensor officer said, his voice shaking. All of them, sir. Over 800 vessels. Terran, human, the Deathworlders. Skithrel had heard stories about humans, of course. Everyone in the galaxy had heard stories. They came from a death world, a planet of crushing gravity and toxic air. They were supposed to be fierce warriors, dangerous in a fight. But they were also few in number, with a small fleet and limited territory. They were not a major power, at least. That was what the intelligence report said, looking at the 800 warships surrounding his fleet. Skithrel realized those reports had been very, very wrong. "Hi, Commander," his communications officer said. "We're receiving a transmission from the Terran flagship. They're requesting to speak with you." Skithrel hesitated. He should refuse. He should order his ships to fight. But something in the way those human ships were positioned made him pause. They were not just surrounding his fleet. They were herding it, cutting off every escape route, boxing him in like prey. "Accept the transmission," he said finally. The main view screen flickered, and a human face appeared. It was a male, dark-skinned and gray-haired, wearing a military uniform covered in medals and insignia. His face was calm, almost peaceful, but his eyes were wrong. They were the eyes of a predator that had stopped pretending to be tame. "I am Fleet Admiral James Okonkwo of the Terran Federation Navy," the human said. His voice was quiet and steady, like the rumble of distant thunder. "You have fired upon civilians under our protection. You have threatened children in our space." Skithrel tried to speak, but the human continued as if he had not noticed. "I am going to give you one chance to power down your weapons and surrender your vessels. You have 30 seconds to comply." "You have no authority here," Skithrel snarled. "This is neutral space. Those refugees are not your people. The Terran Federation has no treaty with the Valkyrie." Admiral Okonkwo tilted his head slightly. When he spoke again, his voice had not changed, but somehow it felt colder. 30 seconds. "High Commander, I suggest you use them wisely. This is an act of war." "The hegemony will." 20 seconds. Skithrel's claws dug into the armrest of his command chair. His officers were looking at him, waiting for orders. Behind him, the tactical display showed 800 human warships, all of them with weapons charged and ready. He had never felt fear before. Not real fear. The Sketh were the predators, the hunters, the masters of all they surveyed. They did not fear anything, but looking into Admiral Okonkwo's eyes, Skithrel felt something new. He felt like prey. 10 seconds. The human's face had not changed. He sat perfectly still, watching Skithrel with those dead predator eyes. There was no anger in his expression, no hatred, just patience. The patience of a hunter who knew his prey had nowhere to run. 5 seconds. Skithrel made his decision. He was a high commander of the Sketh hegemony. He would not surrender to primitives. He would not kneel before Deathworlders. His fleet would fight, and if they died, they would die with honor. "All ships," he roared. "Attack. Destroy them." Admiral Okonkwo closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, there was something almost sad in his expression. "So be it," he said softly. The transmission ended, and then the killing began. Skithrel had expected a battle. What he got was a slaughter. The human ships moved in ways he had never seen before. There was no formation, no predictable pattern. They flowed around his fleet like water, striking from every direction at once. Small fighter craft swarmed like insects, drawing fire away from the larger ships. Destroyers flanked and circled, cutting off escape routes. Cruisers delivered killing blows with weapons that punched through Sketh's armor like it was paper. The pride of Sketh military technology, their advanced jamming systems lasted exactly 4 seconds. The human electronic warfare systems tore through them as if they did not exist. Suddenly, Skithrel's fleet was blind and deaf, unable to coordinate, unable to communicate. The first Sketh warship exploded at 04:07 Terran. Standard time, it was a destroyer on the outer edge of the formation, caught in a crossfire between 3 human frigates. One moment it was there firing back desperately. The next moment, it was a cloud of burning debris. By 04:09, 3 more ships had followed, On the bridge of his flagship, Skethrel watched his tactical display turn red. One by one, his ships were dying. They fought back, but it was useless. For every human ship they targeted, 3 more appeared to take its place. The Deathworlders were everywhere, their weapons never stopping, their ships never slowing down. "High Commander," his weapons officer screamed. "Our shields are failing. Reinforce them. Divert power from engines. There's no power left to divert. They're hitting us from 6 directions at once." Skethrel looked at the view screen and saw death coming for him. A human dreadnought, the TFS Inheritance, was moving toward his flagship. It was enormous, larger than any ship he had ever seen, its hull bristling with weapons. It moved slowly, almost lazily, as if it had all the time in the world, because it did. There was nowhere for Skethrel to go. On the refugee ships, the Valkyrie huddled together in fear. They could hear the sounds of battle outside, the explosions and weapons fire. They did not know what was happening. They only knew that they were still alive. The Sketh had stopped attacking them. Then a new voice came over the emergency channel. It was a human voice, young and female, speaking in calm and gentle tones. "Valkyrie Convoy, this is Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka of the TFS Mercy's Hand. You're safe now. I repeat, you are safe. Medical and rescue teams are on approach. We're going to get you home." For a moment, no one on the convoy could speak. Then a child's voice cut through the silence. A little girl asking her mother what was happening. Her mother held her close, tears streaming down her face. "The humans came," she whispered. "The Deathworlders came for us." Outside, the battle continued. But it was not really a battle anymore. It was an execution, the Sketh hunting fleet. 12 warships that had terrorized this sector for generations was being erased from existence. One by one, their ships fell, destroyed by an enemy that was faster, stronger, and more ruthless than anything they had ever faced. "High Commander." Skethrel died at 0438 Terran Standard Time. When a human torpedo struck the bridge of his flagship, his last thought was a question. Same question that would haunt the Sketh hegemony for generations to come. How did we not see this coming? The battle lasted 11 minutes. The Sketh lost all 12 warships. The humans lost nothing. But as Admiral Okonkwo watched the last Sketh ship break apart, he knew that the real message was yet to come. The Sketh hegemony needed to understand what had happened here. They needed to know that this was not a random act of violence. This was a warning. And if they did not listen, there would be more to come. The silence after the battle was almost louder than the fighting had been. Where 12 Sketh warships had circled like hungry wolves, there was now only debris. Twisted metal floated in the void, still glowing from the heat of weapons fire. Bodies drifted among the wreckage, the remains of crews who had chosen to fight instead of surrender, in the middle of it all. The 3 Valkyrie transport ships hung motionless, their hulls scarred but unbroken. 40,000 refugees were still alive inside them. 40,000 people who had been minutes away from slavery or death. Admiral Roh James Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the TFS Inheritance, looking at the view screen. His face showed no joy, no satisfaction. War was never something to celebrate, even when it was necessary. Even when the enemy deserved what they got. "Status report," he said quietly. "All Sketh vessels destroyed, sir," his tactical officer replied. "No survivors detected in the debris field. The convoy is intact. We have multiple hull breaches on the lead transport, but no civilian casualties. Rescue teams? Already launching, sir. Medical ships are on approach. We'll have the first evacuees aboard within 15 minutes. Okonkwo nodded. "Good. Make sure every one of those people gets whatever they need. Food, water, medical attention. If anyone is injured, they go to our best doctors. No exceptions." "Yes, sir." Across the fleet, rescue operations were beginning. Small shuttles launched from the larger ships, carrying medical teams and supplies. They approached the refugee transports carefully, docking with airlocks or cutting through damaged sections to reach survivors. On the lead transport, Merchant Father Sorel stood at the main airlock, watching as the first human shuttle attached to his ship. He was trembling, not from fear, but from relief so powerful it made his legs weak. For the past hour, he had been certain that he and everyone aboard his convoy were going to die or worse. Now humans were coming through his airlock. Real humans, in person. Wearing strange suits and carrying medical equipment. The first human through the door was a young woman with short, black hair and kind eyes. She looked around at the frightened Valkyrie refugees and smiled gently. "I'm Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka," she said in accented but clear Galactic Common. "We're here to help. Is anyone injured?" Sorrel stepped forward, his tendrils shaking. "We have wounded. In the lower decks. The Sketh weapons caused damage before you arrived." "Show me," Tanaka said immediately. She turned to her team. "Fan out. I want medical assessments on everyone. Priority to children, elderly, and anyone who looks hurt. Move." Her team spread through the transport, moving quickly but calmly. They checked on refugees, handed out water and food packets, and helped the injured onto stretchers. They were efficient and professional, but also gentle. They spoke softly, smiled often, and knelt down to talk to frightened children at eye level in one of the passenger compartments. A Valkyrie mother was holding her daughter close. The little girl was maybe 5 years old, her small tendrils wrapped tightly around her mother's arm. She had been crying for the past hour, terrified by the sounds of battle and the shaking of the ship. A human medic approached them slowly. A young man with red hair and freckles. He crouched down until he was at the child's height. "Hey there," he said softly. "My name's Kevin. What's your name?" The little girl looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. She did not answer. Kevin said, "You don't have to talk if you don't want to. I just wanted to tell you that you're safe now. The bad guys are gone. They can't hurt you anymore." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a tiny stuffed animal, a little creature that looked like an earth rabbit. "This is Mr. Flopsy," Kevin said seriously. "He's been with me since I was your age. He's very brave. I thought maybe you could hold on to him for a while, since you were so brave too." The little girl stared at the stuffed rabbit. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. She held it close to her chest, her grip tight. "Thank you," her mother whispered, tears running down her face. Kevin smiled. "You're welcome. Now, let me make sure you're both okay. Then we'll get you somewhere comfortable." All across the convoy, similar scenes were playing out. Humans comforting the frightened, treating the wounded, feeding the hungry. They asked for nothing in return. They expected no payment, no gratitude. They simply helped, because helping was what they did. On the TFS Mercy's Hand, the medical ship that had arrived with the fleet, Dr. Sarah Williams was performing emergency surgery on a Valkyrie who had been caught in a hull breach. The patient's injuries were severe, but Williams worked with steady hands and focused eyes. "Blood pressure dropping," her assistant warned. "I see it. Give me another unit of synthetic plasma. We're not losing this one." "Doctor, the damage is extensive." "We might not be able to," I said. "We're not losing this one." Williams looked up briefly, her eyes hard. "These people just went through hell. They're not going to die in my operating room. Now hand me that laser scalpel and be quiet." The surgery continued for 3 hours. When it was over, the patient was stable. Williams stepped back from the table, exhausted but satisfied. "Get them to recovery," she said, "and tell the family they're going to be fine." Back on the Inheritance, Admiral Okonkwo was receiving reports from all across the rescue operation. The refugees were safe. The wounded were being treated. The dead, a small number considering how close the convoy had come to disaster, were being collected for proper burial according to Valkyrie customs. But Okonkwo was not finished. The Sketh hegemony needed to understand what had happened here. They needed to know that this was not a random incident, not a mistake, not something that would be forgotten. The humans were sending a message, and they were going to make sure it was heard. "Navigation," Okonkwo said. "Plot a course for the Sketh border." "Full fleet." His navigation officer turned around with a surprised expression. "Sir, we're going to the border." "We are. I want the hegemony to see us. I want every sensor station, every patrol ship, every defensive platform to know that we're there. And then I'm going to explain to them exactly what happens if they ever try something like this again. 800 warships leaving the debris field behind and heading toward Sketh's space. It was not an invasion. The humans had no intention of crossing the border, of starting a war that could kill millions. They were simply making a point. When they arrived at the border, they found exactly what they expected. Sketh warships had gathered on the other side, dozens of them, watching the human fleet with sensors and weapons. They were clearly nervous. They had expected the hunting fleet to return with slaves and glory. Instead, they had heard only silence. And now there were 800 Terran warships on their doorstep. Admiral Okonkwo ordered his fleet to arrange itself in perfect formation. Every ship visible, every weapon prominently displayed. Then he opened a broadcast channel that would reach every corner of the hegemony. "This message is for the Sketh hegemony," he said, his voice calm and cold. 3 days ago, a hunting fleet from your nation attacked a civilian convoy in neutral space. They targeted unarmed refugees. They targeted children. They believed that because the Valkyrie were weak, they were yours to take. He paused, letting the words sink in. They were wrong. The Valkyrie are under human protection now, as is any species that asks for our help. We do not care about your borders. We do not care about your treaties. We do not care about your politics. We care about one thing, and one thing only. You do not hurt the defenseless. Not anymore. Not ever again. This is your only warning. Next time, we will not stop at your border. Next time, we will not leave survivors to carry the message. Next time, we will come to your homeworld and explain our position in person." He leaned forward, and for a moment, the predator inside him was visible to everyone watching. "Remember what you saw today. Remember what humans do when you threaten our friends. And pray you never give us a reason to come back." The transmission ended. The human fleet remained in position for 3 more hours, watching and waiting. Then, when they were certain the message had been received, they turned and went home. The Sketh border closed the next day. No hegemony ship would venture into neutral space for the next 50 years and across the galaxy. Species who had dismissed humans as newcomers and primitives began to look at them with new eyes. The Deathworlders had shown what they were capable of. Nobody wanted to see it again. 1 week after the battle, Ambassador Yevoneri stood before the Galactic Coalition Council. The Great Chamber was full. Representatives from every major species in the coalition had gathered to hear her report. They sat in their designated sections, hundreds of diplomats and leaders, all of them waiting to learn what had happened in that distant corner of space. Yevoneri had spent the past week reviewing every piece of data. Every recording, every survivor testimony. She had spoken to the rescued refugees, to the human commanders, 2 intelligence analysts who had been tracking the Terran Federation for years. She had learned things that changed everything she thought she knew about the galaxy. Now she had to explain it all to beings who still did not understand. The incident began with a Sketh hunting fleet attacking a Valkyrie refugee convoy in neutral space, she said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. 12 warships against 3 unarmed transports carrying 40,000 civilians. By all normal calculations, the convoy should have been captured or destroyed within hours. She paused, her tendrils rippling with emotion. Instead, the convoy was rescued. Every single refugee was saved. The Sketh fleet was completely destroyed. The entire engagement lasted 11 minutes. Murmurs ran through the chamber. 11 minutes? Against 12 warships? That was impossible. That was not how space combat worked. The Terran Federation deployed over 800 warships in response to the attack, Yevoneri continued. They arrived within 1 hour of receiving a distress signal. Their fleet included vessels that our intelligence services did not know existed, including 3 Dreadnought-class ships of unprecedented size and firepower. There were more murmurs. Some of the representatives were beginning to look worried. Others still seemed skeptical. "How is that possible?" asked the ambassador from the Relin Collective. "The humans have only been in space for 200 years. They're supposed to have a small fleet, limited technology." "Our reports indicate our reports were wrong," Yevoneri said flatly. Either the humans have been hiding their true capabilities, or our intelligence gathering has been completely inadequate. Based on what I observed, I believe it is both. She activated a holographic display showing the human fleet as it had appeared over the convoy. 800 ships, arranged in perfect formation, weapons bristling from every hull. Even as a recording, it was terrifying. This was not a full mobilization, Yevaneri said. According to Admiral Okonkwo, the force deployed represented approximately 12% of the Terran active fleet. The chamber fell silent. 12%. That meant the humans had nearly 7,000 warships at their disposal. That was more than the entire coalition military combined. That cannot be accurate, the Rellan ambassador protested. The humans do not have the population or resources to support that kind of fleet. And yet the evidence is undeniable. Yevaneri gestured at the display. I spoke with Admiral Okonkwo personally. He had no reason to lie. In fact, I believe he was understating their numbers to avoid causing panic. The archspeaker of the coalition, a tall being with silver scales and 4 arms, leaned forward in her seat. Ambassador Yevaneri, why were we not informed of this buildup? Why did human expansion go unnoticed for so long? Because we did not want to see it, Yevaneri replied honestly. The humans joined the coalition quietly. They followed our rules, respected our borders, and kept to themselves. We assumed they were content to remain a minor power. We never considered the possibility that they were simply waiting. Waiting for what? Yevaneri hesitated. This was the part that frightened her most, because it did not fit any model of behavior she had ever studied. Waiting for someone to need them, she said finally. The humans did not build their fleet to conquer. They built it to protect. Their entire military philosophy is based on defense, on responding to threats rather than creating them. They had the power to dominate the coalition at any time, but they chose not to use it. Until now, someone muttered. They still have not used it against the coalition, Yevaneri pointed out. They used it against the Sketh in response to an attack on civilians. Children were in danger. That is what triggered their response. Nothing else. The chamber erupted in confused conversation. This did not make sense to most of the species present. Power existed to be used. Strength existed to be demonstrated. The idea that a species would hide its true capabilities, waiting to deploy them only in defense of others, was alien to everything they understood about galactic politics. But Yevaneri had seen the truth in Admiral Okonkwo's eyes. She had heard it in Captain Vasquez's voice. The humans were not conquerors. They were guardians. They had the souls of protectors, a burning need to defend the helpless that ran deeper than politics or profit. And that made them more dangerous than any conqueror could ever be. What happened after the battle? The archspeaker asked. The humans did not stop at the rescue, Yevaneri said. After securing the convoy, Admiral Okonkwo led his entire fleet to the Sketh border. They did not cross it. They did not fire a single shot. They simply appeared, arranged in perfect formation, visible from every Sketh observation post. She played the recording of Admiral Okonkwo's broadcast. His calm voice filled the chamber, delivering the message that the humans had sent to the hegemony and to anyone else who was listening. When the recording ended, the chamber was silent once again. The Sketh hegemony has closed its borders, Yevaneri said. They have recalled all hunting fleets and begun fortifying their defensive positions. Our intelligence indicates that their leadership is in a state of panic. They have never encountered an enemy capable of destroying an entire fleet in 11 minutes with no losses. She took a deep breath. Additionally, 17 refugee populations from various species have formally requested Terran protection. The humans have accepted all of them. Any attack on these populations will now be considered an attack on the Terran Federation itself. The implications of this were staggering. The humans were expanding their sphere of influence not through conquest, but through protection. Species across the galaxy were voluntarily placing themselves under human guardianship, trading their independence for safety. What are we supposed to do with this information? The Rellan ambassador demanded. Are we supposed to be grateful that the humans are not attacking us? Are we supposed to ignore the fact that they could destroy the coalition whenever they choose? I think, Yevaneri said slowly, we are supposed to be very careful about who we threaten, and very thoughtful about how we treat the weak. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every representative. The humans did not come to the convoy's rescue because of treaties or politics. They came because children were screaming. They came because a mother was begging for help. They came because somewhere deep in their nature, they cannot stand by while the defenseless suffer. That instinct is what makes them dangerous, which is also what makes them valuable as allies. If we treat the weak with respect, if we protect the helpless instead of exploiting them, the humans will never turn against us. They will stand beside us as partners and friends. But if we become like the Sketh, she continued, her voice hardening, if we allow cruelty and exploitation to flourish in our borders, then one day we will hear a broadcast on our communication channels. We will hear a human voice telling us that our time is up. We will look out our windows and see 800 warships that we never knew existed. She stepped back from the podium. The choice is ours, but I suggest we choose wisely. The Deathworlders are watching. Far from the Coalition chamber, in her small apartment in New Seoul, Grandmother Min was drinking tea and reading a news report about the rescue. They were calling it the miracle of the convoy, a moment when humans showed the galaxy what they were made of. She smiled and set down her teacup. Her old bomber was back in storage, but it was ready to fly again if needed. And somewhere out there, other humans were keeping watch, waiting for the next call for help, the next cry from someone who needed them. That was what humans did. That was who they were. Not conquerors, not monsters. Protectors. And God help anyone who forgot it. On the TFS Inheritance, Admiral James Okonkwo sat alone in his quarters, looking at a photograph of his daughter and grandchildren. They lived on Earth in a small house near the ocean, far from the dangers of space. He fought so that they could live in peace, so that they would never have to fear the things that lurked in the darkness between stars. He thought about the Velkar children on those transports. He thought about the fear they must have felt, the hopelessness, the certainty that no one was coming to save them, and then someone had come. Someone had heard their cries and crossed the void to help them. That was all it took, he realized. One signal, one call for help. One voice crying out in the darkness. That was all it ever took. He placed the photograph back on his desk and returned to his duties. There was always more work to be done, more people to protect, more darkness to push back. But for now, 40,000 souls were safe. And that was enough. That was everything.